on a topic. We've heard a lot about security issues related to smart grid, sort of the vision for smart grid and some of the enabling technologies. I'd like to speak a little bit about a complementary topic, which is privacy. And I think in one aspect we can think of privacy as a risk in this, but also as something that we need to consider when making some of these smart city technologies cyber secure. So what I'd like to do to start out with, to kind of motivate the discussion, is talk a little bit about examples of past technologies, not necessarily related to smart city, but new technologies that came out that had privacy issues related with them when they were deployed. So for some of you older Facebook users, you might remember back in 2007, Facebook released this Beacon application. And this was something that linked Facebook to some of their partner websites, like Travelocity and eBay and so forth. And whenever you made a purchase there, this would show up on your Facebook newsfeed. Seemed interesting enough, and something that in a sharing environment a lot of Facebook users would like to have available to them, but it was not very well received by the Facebook community and the public in general for a number of privacy issues. Not the least of which it was enabled as something you had to opt out of. So it was turned on by default, and then the user had to actively go in to turn this off. So Facebook very quickly backpedaled and disabled that service. A little more recently in the telecommunications space, a number of handset manufacturers and telecom providers came under fire for the deployment of an application developed by Carrier IQ that collected information off of your handset, including its location, text messages, websites you visited, even keystrokes, supposedly, and sent those back to the carrier, oftentimes without much security, and sometimes in violation of privacy policies and even laws that protected some of that information. We're all familiar with going online and seeing advertising when we check our email and chat and so forth. Unbeknownst to a lot of us, there are an awful lot of processes that go on behind there to serve up those ads to you, most of which are driven by tracking the activity that you take when you go online. And so there are a number of technologies. Trust has investigated this, and others as well. And this has led to what's called this Do Not Track initiative. And we're sort of in the process of working with some of these industry organizations, web browser vendors, and other technology companies to come up with a more privacy-preserving method of allowing you to go online and do activity and still have advertising provided to you as a service, but without revealing very much information about what you do. And a little more close to and relevant to the topic of this workshop are smart meters, which we all know are a key component of advanced metering infrastructure and some of the next generation technology that's being deployed. Here in California, as elsewhere, there are a number of concerns around the security of the devices. Consumers, advocacy groups, researchers all identified some security problems with the devices themselves, and also issues around protecting the data, the energy usage data that was collected from them. So this is not an exhaustive list, but just an example. But there's some common themes across all of these. One of which is that each of these technologies was intended to provide sort of enhanced services or new features to the user. But when they were deployed, there was very quickly some backlash and some negative reaction by those who used them. This not only caused the companies to kind of scramble to have to backpedal or make changes to their systems, but there was also a lot of public relations work that they had to do and so forth, a lot of saving face to help the public understand what they were trying to do. And then all of these systems and technologies have been modified, either the technologies themselves or the operational processes around them, or in some cases, like with Beacon, they were completely disabled altogether. So when we talk about smart city, I didn't bring those up to sort of rehash some missteps in the past, but what I wanted to do was kind of have it inform the discussion around how we think about privacy when we are looking at and sort of thinking about the enabling technologies that are required for a smart city and smart infrastructure. So we've heard kind of various opinions about what a smart city entails. And sort of notionally, these are some things that would be provided: more efficient operations and access to services, improved quality of life for citizens within a city, reduced carbon footprint and other impacts to the environment, as well as an expectation of a more adaptive infrastructure that will support these new services, and also resilience, something that's more secure and more stable and able to withstand various types of faults, failures, or attacks, as we've sort of heard earlier. In order to achieve this, however, there are a number of capabilities and technologies that need to be put in place. And each of these, this is, again, it is not an exhaustive list, but a few examples of some things that bring along with them some unique privacy issues or considerations when they're being deployed. So one aspect is this increased interconnection and automation, and Galen talked a little bit about this, and we heard other speakers mention this as well. So in order to provide some of these services, there's going to be more connectivity, more automation within the infrastructure. Along with that, more, I won't call it ubiquitous, but more sensing, more monitoring, potentially more actuation, sort of more devices in the environment, sort of this, what's in the past been kind of thought of as this embedded everywhere or Internet of Things, sort of the next generation of that where everything will be instrumented, a lot of information will be collected. And this increased data will grow exponentially, and along with that will be the need for some sophisticated tools and other technologies to do more robust analytics and be able to really mine the large amount of data that's being collected to come up with some meaningful information and something that's useful to not only the infrastructure operators but the end users as well, the citizens, the municipalities, and so forth. And enabling a lot of this is the ICT and network control systems and some of the management and operational systems that will sit on top of it as well. So all of these introduce kind of unique privacy issues with them as they're being deployed, as they're being used, as people interact with the technologies. So how do we ensure that privacy is addressed in a smart city? And I was pleased to hear some of the comments I'll mention here in a second brought up earlier, but a few examples are shown here, and again, it's not meant to be exhaustive, but I think these are some points that should be taken into consideration, especially as we're thinking about designing, developing, and deploying some of these technologies. So first, privacy policies and requirements, much like security, need to be aligned and part of the discussion from the beginning with broader objectives for the technology or the application, and make sure that the privacy side is considered along with some of the other drivers of the technology. Second, solutions should address not just technology, but also people and policy. So this holistic approach is beneficial when considering deploying any solution, but in this context, there's a real emphasis on the privacy aspect of it and how it relates to the technology, to standards, laws, and so forth. Finally, as was illustrated from the examples earlier, privacy is a vital prerequisite for consumer adoption of any technology. Putting privacy at or near the center of the design and the deployment decisions will help, and I was pleased to see Don emphasize that, and I think it came up in an earlier discussion as well. Likewise, understanding the trade-offs people make when it comes to privacy is a real key. So, today all of us give up a certain amount of privacy to get something in return, whether it's swiping our club card at Safeway or purchasing something on Amazon or deploying, as we heard about yesterday, deploying an intelligent thermostat like Nest. There's a certain amount of privacy that we give up, but if the utility is greater than that, we're usually okay with it. Along with that, while we've got an expectation of that our personal information is protected, each person's idea of privacy is different. Thus, there's a need to deeply understand this notion of privacy and how it can impact consumer adoption, especially as we're thinking about some of these enabling technologies that will allow this smart city concept. The privacy aspects of it really need to be considered, and some of this consumer sentiment, social norms, and since we're sort of talking about this US-EU forum as well, differences between privacy perceptions and notions of privacy here in the US are very different from Europe, they're very different from Asia, and so forth. So as we're talking about solutions that can be deployed globally, we need to consider how they will be perceived in the various target markets. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll have time for questions afterwards. I think if I could, are we okay on time?